So you're doing his show next week as well?
I think so. Okay. Hello, I'm Sharon Stenford, and I'm filling in for Terrence Rothman in his show, What We Should Know. I have here the director of CCTV, Susan Fleischmann. Thank you for agreeing to be the guest on this show, Susan.
Thanks for having me.
And I would like to find out more about the hearings that are at the State House in the negotiations with the Verizon contract.
Sure. Let me explain a little bit about how cable franchising works first, because just give people a little bit of a background behind that. The way that cable comes into a city is by negotiating with the city to provide the service to its residents. And the reason the negotiation happens between the city and the cable company is because the cable company needs to use the city's public rights of way. So that's the streets and the sidewalks and the poles that really belong to us as citizens of the community. And when you think about how much money the cable companies make from their business, and that the fact that they're using public property, the negotiations are about what the company's going to give back to the community in exchange for using that public property. So it's sort of a kind of rent for that. So it's sort of like, if somebody went and set up a business out on the sidewalk, you would expect them to pay the city something for the use of that sidewalk space. So the negotiations here in Cambridge, there have not been negotiations as of yet with Verizon. We've had one cable company since 1986. It's changed. Who that cable company has changed. We've had about 5 different cable companies, but there's always only been one provider of video services in Cambridge. These licenses are not exclusive, so another cable provider could come in. And Verizon has started negotiating across the state for franchises, typically in communities that already have another provider. So Verizon, as of about two or 3 years ago, started complaining about how difficult it was to negotiate with each individual community one by one, as had all the cable companies been doing for 30 or more years. They didn't want it to be like that because they're used to running a telephone business, and that's not how telephone is regulated. So they started trying to change the law, first at the federal level with the federal legislature, then with the Federal Communications Committee, and then they came to the state level in 2007 and were hoping to make franchising happen at the state level and not at the local level. So they were looking for an easy way to get in without having to go to each community and negotiate. And the reason that it's important that we maintain this local control, not only is it because this is our property, but, excuse me for going on and on, but not only is it because this is our property, but it's also because each community has different needs from the cable company. So here in Cambridge, we're really fortunate that, for example, we have 6 community cable channels, which is not the case in a lot of communities. So we're really fortunate that the city manager, as the quote issuing authority of the cable license, has chosen to continue to request that from the cable company. So as I said, so each community has a different sort of makeup and different kinds of set of needs that need to be taken into account during this licensing process. So Verizon, after complaining that it was too hard to go community by community, they've actually gotten over 90 franchises in the state. So it's not really proving to be a problem. And most communities want there to be competition, so it's not like anybody's throwing up any obstacles. But Verizon says that it takes too long, and so now their legislation that they're proposing at the state level this year is to collapse the licensing period to a mere 90 days, which is totally ridiculous. If you've ever tried to get anything done in the city, trying to do anything in 90 days is absurd. And one of the parts of this discussion is to get meaningful community input, so that there need to be public hearings, there need to be chances for all of us to communicate to the city manager and to the cable company coming in what we want from out of the cable system. So the new legislation is saying that if Verizon or any other cable provider comes to a city and requests a license, the city has 10 days to start negotiations. The city has 90 days to hold a public hearing on those negotiations, and then 5 days after the public hearing, they have to either grant or deny a license, which is a ridiculously, I think, collapsed period of time. Now, all of this is not very interesting or exciting or sexy, but the thing that's important about it is to remember that we have control over our public property, and a company coming in can't dictate how long these negotiations take, or any of these things should be negotiated in good faith with the people of the community. So
Okay.
that's what this is all about. So the hearing on July 22nd that you mentioned, there's going to be a public hearing before the Joint Telecommunications Committee of the state legislature. So that's the senators and the representatives who come together as the Joint Telecommunications Committee. And they're going to be holding a public hearing to hear what we have to say about this. So it's really important to get as many people to come to that hearing as possible.
And what time is it on July 22nd?
It's at 10 a.m. We're going to be meeting people here at CCTV at 9 a.m. to go over together on the red line if people are interested in doing that. And you don't have to worry about speaking or anything. We really probably won't have the opportunity to speak. The last time they had such a public hearing in 2007 when the other legislation was proposed, there were hundreds of people in the room, and there was a sign-up sheet this long to talk. So probably none of us will have to talk, but we just have to go there and we'll have little stickers that say no on this whatever, and just because also last time Verizon brought a lot of their workers to just sit in the audience so that it looked like there were a lot of people supporting their side.
So they initiated having this hearing.
Well,
Verizon.
no, actually, they filed. Well, the legislation was filed on their behalf by Senator Pangiotakis from the Lowell area, and a representative from the Westport, Mass area. I can't remember his name right now. So that somebody from the House of Representatives does it, and somebody from the Senate does it. And this is hearing called by the Joint Telecommunications Committee. So they are calling the hearing to get public input.
And how long did we used to have to communicate in this process? How much has it been suggested we cut the process short of what it used to be?
Well, that's a really good question. State law does not actually have a time frame. Federal law has a 3-year window of time. So we're talking about 36 months being collapsed down to 3 months.
My goodness,
Yes.
that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And it's just for their convenience, do you think?
I do think so.
And like you said, trying to get everybody's input in that time frame must be really challenging. So, is Cambridge among how many communities do you think will be represented at this hearing?
Oh, I would think dozens. The last time around, the legislation included some very specific language about public access, and that was something that really resonated for a lot of public access people across the state. This time, it's a little harder for us to grasp, and it's a little harder for us to get excited about because there's not really a whole lot of language about public access. So it's, and as I said, this isn't a really interesting topic. It's kind of policy wonky, and you can't go, oh, they're stealing our public access. It's not that, it's a little more amorphous than that. So it's a little harder to organize around, but it's still important,
And you talked about competition. So how does this affect competition in Cambridge?
Another good question. As I said, a lot of people want competition in the belief that once there's competition, cable rates will go down. There'll be better service because people, the two providers would be competing against each other. But in fact, that's not typically the case. Usually in communities where there are 2 or more providers, there's possibly a short period of time where they're really competing with rates, and then things kind of reach status quo. However, that's not to say that people don't have really significant arguments against Comcast service, and there would be good reason to have a competitor here in Cambridge, and I think people would be interested in that.
And how does CCTV compare to other communities? It seems to me they offer a lot to the community, and maybe some of that is based on what contract they have with the provider.
Absolutely.
That we have so many resources here.
Absolutely, that is absolutely the case. By state law, and actually I think also federal law, the most actual money that a cable company can be asked for is up to 5% of their gross revenues. And so Cambridge does get 5% of Comcast gross revenues, and CCTV gets 60% of that. And then Cambridge Educational Access gets a little tiny stipend. They're the channels 98 and 99. And then the balance goes to City TV8, which is the municipal channel. And so we are pretty well funded, and but we've also leveraged that money in a lot of ways to get more money through grants and other means and sponsorships and people coming to our fundraiser. But we also are in the greatest community in the Commonwealth or in the country, so it's about the resources we have, and it's also about the sort of activist community that we have, and people are really interested and excited in talking about the things that are important to them in this community. So, so the membership is just so dynamic, and the community is so dynamic, and so people like to get involved.
And bringing this to the State House level, won't each community still have to decide for themselves what they want to do, even though it's being brought to a statewide forum?
Yes, well, hopefully the caveat is still remains the same, that the cities and towns have the right to control their public rights of way. So hopefully that will never go to the state level. And I think that Verizon heard that loud and clear last time, that people do not want to give up the control over their streets and sidewalks. And one of the things that one example was that right now, if a cable truck runs through a fence in your yard, you want to be able to complain at the local level to have the city government intervene on your behalf with the cable company, as opposed to if it were at the state level, you'd have to be working with someone, on Beacon Hill, and if it were at the federal level, you'd be like complaining to the FCC. And
right.
how would
it's
you
nice
ever
to deal close to home?
Exactly, you have no leverage the further away it
Mm-hmm.
gets.
Right. And you said people don't have to speak up at this hearing, but will there be speakers that are already planned, that representatives who will give the side of the story of the local communities?
Yeah, I'm sure there are, and that's also a good question. I mean, I'm not planning on speaking. As I said the last time, the list was really, really long. One of the best advocates, well, there are a couple of really, really strong, solid advocates for our interests, and one is Mayor Joseph Curtatone from Somerville is really active in this, and he's really a very vocal opponent to this legislation. The other is the Mass Municipal Association, which has just a great deal of support across the state, and I'm sure that they'll be speaking as well. So.
And just to answer some of my questions that I was curious about, a lot of people live in Cambridge don't originally come from here, and I understand you come from the South, and coming to a place like Cambridge, how do you compare the media here in this town as to some of the other places you might have observed? And
well, the funny thing about Cambridge is no matter how long you've lived here, you're still not a native Cambridgian unless
Right.
you were born here.
Right.
I actually left the South when I was 16, so I can't really, all I can comment about that is that I remember when cable started in Florida, where I grew up, and it was like there were 12 channels, and that was what cable was, and it was because we had very poor television reception from antennas. So it's kind of I don't really have a lot of experience in other communities. I moved to Cambridge in 1981, and I had been trained in Boston at Boston Neighborhood Network, which was a public access station there, and they had just opened a few years before. So I was involved there from the very beginning, and then was involved there for about 3 years, and then I came to Cambridge.
And when did you first become involved with CCTV?
I was hired in 1988, the first year we opened, as the access coordinator. So CCTV was incorporated in late 1986, and the first executive director was hired in 1987 to build a facility which was originally over in Kendall Square. And he was the executive director, and then he hired me as the access coordinator the year that we opened. So I was hired in March or April of 1988, and we opened officially. Actually, I was hired in March. We had a soft opening in April, and then we officially opened in September of 1988.
That's a long time to be
Yeah,
at the station
it
since
is.
'88.
Yeah.
And what would you say the major milestones were here at the TV station as you've seen it evolve over the years?
Well, certainly our move to Central Square, which was huge. That was in 1995, and we really felt that it was important to get into more of a community. As I said, we were in 1 Kendall Square. It was far from the T. It was really kind of removed from the neighborhoods. So moving here, I think, really energized us in a lot of ways. In 1994, we won our first overall Excellence in Public Access Programming Award. We've since won 7 more, so that's been pretty exciting. But just over the years, seeing the evolution of the membership and the evolution of the quality of the programming that's produced here, I'm really always amazed at what people do and how passionate people are about what they do here. And also just sort of how people get to know others from different communities. And I think it's a real melting pot of Cambridge, and I think that there are very few places you can go anywhere in cities that you can mix it up like you do here at
Yes,
CCTV.
I'm amazed at the freedom they give you here on, say, the Belive shows, that people have done a wide variety of things on their
Mhm.
shows, you
Well,
know.
you're a perfect example. I mean, some of your interviews are, with people who I'm sure you're not used to hanging out with.
Well,
you know.
I mean, the hardest thing is getting people who aren't too shy to be on TV.
Really?
But once you get them on the show, they have a
Uh-huh.
lot to say sometimes. And so, what would you say are the most challenging issues that have come up over the years with CCTV?
Well, we always have the challenge of just what you had mentioned about the free speech and the freedom that people have on our channels, that a lot of people who are just viewers don't necessarily understand the concept of free speech and the First Amendment and how that applies to our channels. So anything that's protected speech under the First Amendment is allowed on CCTV's channels because we're on cable and not being broadcast over the airwaves. So there are different regulations about what goes through the air versus what can be on cable. And people call me up all the time and say, I can't believe you let that be on TV. And I have to explain that I don't let it be on TV. I'm not allowed to not let it be on TV.
Right, you don't censor anything
Exactly.
unless it's really extreme. I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think even things that are really extreme, we rarely pull anything. The line that we've used over the years is if the only person who can tell me to pull something off is a judge in a court. So somebody would have to complain to go through the legal channels to get something taken off. I have taken things off that violated copyright, because we are not allowed to violate copyright. But what's considered protected speech under the First Amendment is something that it's codified in law, but a lot of people still say, so you're not allowed to have libel or slander. You're not allowed to have sedition, which is advocating violent overthrow of the government, and you're not allowed to have obscenity. So people will call them and they'll say, that's obscene. And I'm like, I'm not sure it's obscene.
Right.
And obscenity is often, determined by community standards. So
Right.
it has to go to a court, so that's always a challenge. We've also had these various legislative threats over the years, and we always have to, pick ourselves up and get ourselves over to the State House or whatever and make sure that, we make our voices heard there to keep back some of this legislation that could have a harmful effect on CCTV.
And what specifically were some of the other legislative threats that have come along over the years?
Well, actually, the one, this one of, trying to remove local control over the public rights of way. I mean, they're not really trying to remove local control over the public rights of way. What they're trying to do is change franchising so that it happens on a national level or a state level. And it first came up in the year 2000. I remember Paul Cellucci was the governor. So that was when it first started happening. And it's like these companies don't want to take the time that it takes to negotiate with different communities. And we all have different needs. We're not the same. So it's really critical that negotiation continues to take place on a local level. One of the other things that happened that was really challenging was in 2002, we had just started, cable companies had just started providing broadband access over the cable. So people were getting their internet through their cable modem for the first time in around 2001, 2002. And at the beginning, we were receiving revenues on that money, 5% of the gross revenues of that money. And that money was getting to be huge. I mean, it was the area of the biggest growth for cable companies. And those of you who get your internet on cable, you're paying $40 a month for that. And if you can imagine that 5% of that would be going to CCTV and the municipal channel. And anyway, the FCC ruled that was no longer considered a cable service, even though it's coming through the same cable lines that go through our streets and sidewalks. So that was a big loss of revenue for us, and that was pretty challenging.
So this battle is not just happening in Massachusetts, it's all over the country, you would say?
Absolutely, and 18 states have already sort of folded, and they now have franchising at the statewide level. So, Massachusetts is a very well-organized community of public access centers, so we've been able to hold that back, but it's definitely a threat.
And so we talked about some of the challenges that have come up in CCTV. What were the most fun things you can think of that have involved your role as director and overseeing the whole TV station?
Well, Belive, when Belive started in 1993, that was part of our 5th anniversary celebration. We started Belive. And just to see what people do here, I mean, it's really, I mean, you've seen it.
Yes.
It's just, it's so amazing, and that you can sit at home as a viewer. By the way, I never watch TV. But you can sit at home as a viewer and just like watch this parade of people and, you know, issues and talents and content. It's mind-boggling,
Yes,
you know.
it is.
And sometimes I've said, you know, if we lost all of our funding, as long as we could just have this little room, you know, we could still have CCTV.
Yes. And could you tell us some things that are going on in the summer other than the hearing, other events? I know the end of summer barbecue, that's being planned now.
Well, we have our orientations going on, so there's an
Okay.
orientation tonight,
Right.
but that's going to be too late for these folks.
Yeah.
So there's an orientation once a month. That is always going on. We always have a new round of classes starting each month. So if people are, you know, holding back on their work or getting laid off, God forbid, you know, they can come down here and find stuff to do. But the big thing that happens here that really blows us away is the Summer Media Institute, which is when our youth program, our summer youth program happens, and we're supported by the Mayor's Summer Youth Employment Program as well as a bunch of different local foundations, and we really appreciate that. But the youth program, the summer program's grown from 12 participants that we had for a number of years, just kind of steady at 12, and we now have about double that. So this place is rocking off the hinges, as you can imagine, with about 24 kids here every single day.
Now, these are through the mayor's employment program?
Yes.
And what kinds of things do the young people do?
Well, if they're beginners, we usually start them off with a personal narrative project of some sort, so they do a small, short piece about a person, place, or event that's important to them. And they do that on their own, and then they move into group projects that often have something to do with a connection to a Cambridge organization or, again, an issue in Cambridge that is of interest to them.
So are these people already involved in something at the high school level, or do they just indicate on the form, the employment form, that they want to work here?
It ranges. So we have beginners who have never done anything before, and if they come to us and they say they want to be in our youth program, we ask for them and they ask for us, and we get matched up. Some of the kids do have something to do with video at the high school. There's, as I mentioned, Cambridge Educational Access. They opened in 2005, and they're providing sort of the same kind of service to the school community, to the educational community in Cambridge. And so they do have internships over there that some of the kids might have been involved in, and then they might come here. But we also have a school year production program here. So some of the kids have either gone from the Summer Media Institute into the school year production program, or vice versa, started in the school year program and gone into the summer program. So we have relationships with, I'd say, 75% of the kids already, and others are new.
Right. And I think, you know, the wonderful thing about CCTV is a lot of people have the will to do media, but they don't have the technological way to do it. And you provide that, because I think for a lot of people, technology is challenging and it's changing constantly. So the classes fill in the gaps, and you have on Friday evenings, you have a tutor in the media labs, and who can help people through the technological aspects that are challenging in producing media. And that's just a gift to the community that I think a lot of people don't know it exists here, and it's just a wonderful thing.
That is
no
kind
matter
of
how
amazing.
basic you are, you can start somewhere.
After 21 years, we're still trying to reach out to people, and there's still, you're right, there are a lot of people who don't know what we have here.
Yes. And so what do you see in the near future for goals that CCTV is aiming for?
Well, we have a couple things on tap right now. One is, as I mentioned, this legislation, which we need to make sure that gets put to bed quickly. The other is that we're at the end, the city's at the end of its most recent 10-year license with Comcast. That will expire at the end of 2010. So we are actively involved in this very important community process to determine what people need in the next cable license, and what CCTV needs, and what the other access stations need. That's a process that, as I said, it could take up to 3 years by federal law. And we've just started it, so it's going to be the next year and a half or so that we'll be having public hearings and having focus groups. And I really want to encourage people to attend a focus group or a public hearing. Those are going to be happening in early October, and I'll be certainly letting as many people know as I can about that. And then finally, our lease is up next year. So we're figuring out if we're going to stay here and possibly expand, or if we're going to be moving on to someplace else.
I've heard that a lot of the people involved in CCTV are from the direct neighborhoods surrounding
Mhm.
it. So that really seems like a critical aspect of where
Mhm.
it's located and
Yes.
who comes and shows up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
we've been able to serve this community really well. I feel like it's a little bit of a issue that we haven't been able to draw as many people from North Cambridge or
Mhm.
West Cambridge. But I think that I personally feel like we belong in this neighborhood, and I hope that we can stay here.
And could you talk just briefly about the Digital Divide program? I think
Mhm.
that's a wonderful thing. Could you
Sure.
tell us what that is?
It's been challenging. The Digital Divide Project is something that started with the city's IT department. Actually, some folks on the city council, I think led by Councilor Davis, Henrietta Davis, asked that we start looking at municipal Wi-Fi. And municipal Wi-Fi is the provision by the city of wireless internet in various points throughout the city, and obviously people always want it to be blanketed across the city, but it's really technically difficult to do that. So as a pilot project, the IT department was asked to wire Newtown Court with Wi-Fi, and they did do that. And then to sort of extend that program, Councilor Davis was saying, can we provide computers and training in that area as well? And so CCTV was chosen as the project manager for that project, and it was really challenging on a number of levels. We used refurbished computers, and the Wi-Fi, technologically the Wi-Fi has a lot of issues that we've been trying to work on and trying to make the network better. So we're continuing to try to work with the families, the 50 families who were involved, and we're trying to expand it within Newtown Court and also possibly to other housing developments, public housing in the city. So we're still working on it, but we need more funds
And getting people up to speed with the computer use so that they can be in the wave of opportunity that's out there on the computer.
right.
So could we just review the contact information for the hearing
Mhm.
to remind people?
Okay, so we're looking for people to come on July 22nd, either come meet at CCTV at 9 a.m. or come to the State House rooms A1 and A2 at 10 a.m. when the hearing starts. And, you know, even if you can just show up for an hour or two just to show your support or your opposition to this legislation, it would be really helpful. And I want to say thank you so much, Sharon, for
Great.
giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Okay.
We learned a lot.
Yeah, so we'll see you all on the 22nd.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks. Cool.
Good. Oh,
Thank
and
you.
that was the first time